Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
How do you know that Antonia and I are speaking from personal experience when we talk about personal growth issues here at Personality Hacker? How do you know that we haven't just read things out of a book, integrated them to the degree where we could regurgitate them to you and talk about personal growth things in the abstract? And we throw some personal stories in there. I guess that's one way to know. But how do you know we're not bullshitting you? How do you know we're not just pulling things out of the air, using some real fancy language and telling you, hey, this is how you can grow yourself and develop yourself in personal development? In fact, how do you know that you're not doing the same thing? How do you know that you're not maybe pulling things out of a book and putting some fancy words to them and telling your friends or posting into our Facebook group or talking about it online in some way, or shooting videos even? Like, how do we know this as people? How do we know that we're the real deal? How do Antonia and I know when we show up to the microphone that we're not just bullshitting? How do we know that we're talking what we assume is truth or authentic reality or helpfulness to people? How do we know that? I think that's really the topic of today's podcast, is understanding the truth of personal development versus this pseudo idea of developing yourself in an expectant way, a way that's like a wishful thinking framework of personal growth.
Yeah, well, and I think the reason why it's such a fair question is not only are people, the first question was, how do you know that we're not, just bullshitting people? And I don't think people can know that. Like, I don't know if that's a knowable thing, except that when you hear the ring of truth, and truth, I don't mean capital T truth, but I mean, I think we kind of energetically or vibrationally know when we're hearing something that might be onto something. So if a person's stuck around and been listening to a lot of our podcasts, then at least for them, for that person, then we're hitting a vibration that it feels good to them. But as far as whether or not we're just doing pseudo development and just making ourselves feel really good, and then just feeding our egos by talking about transcending our egos, I think it's a fair question. I think it's something everybody should ask themselves. And one of the reasons why this topic came up is on our Intuitive Awakening Facebook group, somebody brought up this concept of pseudo development. And I thought that was really fascinating, especially in a personal development group where people are at all different levels of development. It's really easy to look at somebody else and maybe in their posts or the things that they say, see all the things that are maybe that we think are wrong with them, and then go, well, that person's not really into growth. Like, if they were really into growth, then they wouldn't be saying it that way. And I think when it comes to ourselves, one of the things that personal development does is it fills a niche that has traditionally been filled by other paradigms and doctrines and communities. I think personal development is a way for, people to find like minds and gather to talk about more esoteric topics. And I think in the past, religion has often filled that, and maybe other things like, I don't know what other institutions fill that niche in the past, but I think religion has been the number one. And so personal development ends up becoming like a religion because people can gather together and use certain phrases and words that are like we use the phrase hold space. In fact, we've even made fun of ourselves for using it so often. We talked about how it could be turned into like a drinking game. Like, every time we use the phrase hold space, you take a shot. And I would imagine that on some of our podcasts, a person would be dead by the end of it because we've used the phrase so many times. And that's a personal development phrase, is to hold space and have a safe space. And, these concepts of ego transcendence and ego work and growth and introspection. And there's all sorts of, different catchphrases that people can use to simulate the real thing. And that's, it's because it's based on the real thing. And so what can happen in growth and development is that the rewards of being in a personal development community, or the rewards of feeling like you're growing, can overshadow the rewards of doing the real thing, because the real thing is much, much, much more difficult. It's this idea of, buying yoga pants versus actually going to yoga. Like, buying the yoga pants and thinking you look kind of good in them, and like, yeah, okay, that there's a reward there. And then the actual doing of the yoga maybe takes a few classes before you're seeing any return, and so it's easy to peter out. It's easy to go to the first yoga class, but it's not so easy to go to like the third or fourth. And personal development can be similar. It's easy to show up, it's easy to learn the language, it's easy to buy the books and feel really good about it, but how do you know that you're actually doing the work as opposed to just, finding yet another thing that makes you feel good about being yourself?
One of our mentors used to say this phrase. We used to go to some of his workshops. In fact, we met at one of his sponsored workshops, weirdly enough. He used to say that true learning equals behavior change. And that's kind of always stuck with me since I heard that. It's this idea that we can say a lot of fancy things, we can show up and present ourselves in certain ways, use particular terminology, and yet has our behavior changed? And I even go back to my faith-based background, my faith time period in my life when I had a similar thought. Like there were a lot of people that would come to church on Easter, for example, once a year, just because that was the thing you did, but they weren't really living out their faith the rest of the year as much. And I always wanted to be the real deal. I always wanted behavior change to be the emergent. But I think even in the midst of that, there's still this element of potentially shining it on, even if you have quote unquote behavior change. I've been around people in the personal growth arena that can show up to maybe an argument and get really present in the middle of an argument, or look like they don't get triggered or get upset about things. And in some ways, there's some authenticity there. There's some realness to the people that show up that way. And I've also been around people where they figured out a hack in the middle of it, and it doesn't necessarily translate to other areas of their life. So they've done maybe work in one area of their life. And I think we're all like this, right? Like we all seem to show up in whatever area it is that we feel like we have some mastery over, and we tend to double down on that tool or that framework. And sometimes it doesn't ooze out into the other parts of our life or our existence. And I think for me, for example, I like to look to see how can I stretch out the things that I am doing well into the parts of where maybe I have more challenges to go in some ways. Doing this podcast is a lot of it's a weird yin-yang ego trip in some ways. Like it's a bizarre experience when you put yourself out in the public. And we've not just done the podcast, we've also done live events now. We've been doing live meetups. We're going to be planning more of those. We're doing online video more than ever before. We have the podcast now cross-posting to a YouTube channel exclusively dedicated just to the podcast. So our reach is starting to broaden. We're working on a book we're going to publish, so our reach is going to broaden there as well. And we're starting to get more feedback than ever before. And some of it is very depersonalized. We're no longer necessarily having a direct, like you listen to this podcast, probably if you're a new listener, this is your first time, but if you have been listening for a while, you're probably listening to us on a regular basis. You might even have binged listened. We hear a lot of people talk about listening to the podcast in a binge format where they'll be on a commute or a long trip and they'll just listen to podcast after podcast after podcast. You get a sense of getting to know us. We become persons to you. We're people. We're real people with real thoughts and feelings. You get to know our heart. But if you're somebody stumbling upon maybe a 5-minute video on YouTube, we're just a random person on YouTube that you're watching. And so it's easier to maybe put harsher criticism out. So in doing this podcast and in showing up in a public setting, it's been a very interesting ego play in that it feels really good. I'll just speak for myself. I won't speak for you, Antonia, but I'm guessing you'd resonate with some of this. It feels really good when you get good feedback from the world. Like if you listening right now wrote in and said something really kind about me, it would give me a little ego boost. I can't help but feel good about the feeling that I get when I hear good things and positive things about me. And if somebody wrote something very negative, I take a little bit of an ego hit. It's a hard, like, wow, that person misunderstood what I meant. Like that wasn't my intent. For example, we just had a very harsh piece of criticism that was written online from someone who we thought we showed up really well to and provided great value to. And the person that gave the feedback wasn't just critical. In fact, they started out the feedback by saying, the podcast is okay. And I learned a lot of good stuff from it. But then ... And this person slammed one of the people in our staff, our team. They slammed you personally, Antonia. They slammed what we're doing. And it wasn't even like a constructive, like, hey, here's some things that are bad and maybe you could improve them. It was like, it felt vindictive almost like revenge in a way, just to be hurtful. And they did it anonymously. And we know that it was a person that was close in some format because they identified themselves as being part of one of our programs. And that was a tough ego experience for me to read that. I was like, I want to know who this person was so I could talk to them and say, you misunderstood. You didn't get it right. You mischaracterized. You were spiteful and hurtful and harmful. And you made the things that were good about what we do appear bad. You talked about how people saying things were life-changing for them. You mocked them publicly in your comment and your feedback, and you mocked us for helping people feel that way. And I wanted to set it right. I wanted to make it right in the world. And I wanted to say, you totally didn't get the point. You totally misread this situation. And I can't do that. It feels so frustrating to have shackles or have your throat or mouth closed to not be able to speak back to what I would initially say would be unfair criticism because you're not doing it in a public way to where we could give an answer back. So it's an ego trip in that it's great to hear positive things. It's great to have somebody come out at a podcast and come up and tell you how maybe you've impacted their life in some way. And then it's an ego hit when you get negative comments. So it's an interesting experience doing something in the public light. And you might have had this in your life. If you're listening, maybe you've done something. We have a lot of people that listen that have their own podcasts or have their own video channels, or they write a blog, or they're creating something in the outer world and they're putting their neck out there. And I'm sure you've had some experience where you've put yourself out and you've had some feedback that's maybe different or positive or negative. And with the positive feedback, you feel a boost up. And with the negative or the challenging feedback, let's just say challenging instead of negative, maybe it's tough. It's tough to get through. And I think there's another piece of this too. When you put yourself out there and you are doing personal growth in the public light, so you're basically doing personal growth work, you might be teaching it, you're like we are doing a podcast on it, talking about it week in and week out for over 4 years now, 200 and some odd episodes at this point. It would be very easy to paint ourselves into a corner to where, so this is the thing, we've talked about this in recent times too, with this whole idea of don't make gurus your heroes and things of this nature. It's, if you're doing this and you get to a place where you run into some struggle and things you have to fix in your life, it's very easy to just fall back on the right words to say, the right ways to show up, the old tropes, and you have status behind you now. You've got not just all the things you've learned around personal growth, but you have some status in that you might have a following, like we do here at Personality Hacker. We have a following. So almost like a bully pulpit, we have a megaphone. We can say things and it has a little bit more credibility because of all the things we've said up till now. And let's say we needed to do some growth, it would be very easy for us to gloss over the growth that would be needed and say the right stuff, get the message out, and then not be growing under the surface and showing up in a pseudo way. And that's one of the challenges. I think that's one of the things that I'm always watching for in myself is, am I showing up as the real deal? And I'm sure I'm not. I'm sure there's areas of my life in personal growth, in being on a podcast, in teaching, in being on stage, all these different contexts. I'm sure I'm showing up and bullshitting my way through somewhere. I'm sure that's happening. It has to be happening. If it's not happening, and I will sit with myself, in my journals and think through this, but that has to be happening. All of us are human. All of us have this struggle of showing up as the real deal from time to time. So of course that's going to be happening in some way, even if you're not aware of it. And so you take that from a high level, like something like listening to this podcast, listening to Antonia and myself talk, and just boil that down. Now distill that down to your life and where you're at. You might also have your own podcast with lots of followers. You might have your own blog or your whatever. Or you might just be somebody that's involved in a community online, just talking about issues and, hashing the big stuff of life out with people like and trust, maybe even here at one of our curated communities at Personality Hacker. And you could ask yourself, where am I showing up bullshitting on my side? Because I'm asking myself that, and that might be something you want to ask as well. And have you painted yourself into a corner? Have you gotten to a place where maybe there's some things we could look at? Where is the real growth from the pseudo growth? And I think those are just some ideas and concepts I want to throw out there as we're unpacking this discussion, because from my standpoint, we're all bullshitting ourselves in some way. The question is, where are we bullshitting ourselves? Not are we bullshitting ourselves, right?
Yeah, I'd agree. I observe that some of the people that I know want to get to a place of status because that's the dream. The dream is to get to a place where people just ascribe to you positive intent and that you're doing the work. And so if you can manage to become high status in a personal development context, if you can be the highest status person in a group or the coach everybody is seeking or whatever, then now you kind of have it made and you don't have to do as much work. And I understand the appeal of that. I totally understand the appeal of that. It would be super easy to just go, like to have this also pseudo vulnerability. Like, you and I were fighting the other day and that shows that I've not arrived because we were fighting, right? And it's like, well, we were fighting because we fight because we're a passionate relationship, and it has nothing to do with being transparent to say that we were in a fight. It has, like that's just what reality is. And sharing that doesn't necessarily make me, more vulnerable. It just means that was what was happening. But I could totally see gaming all of this, gaming it and saying the right things, like you mentioned, using the right words and the phrases that I mentioned before. And then knowing exactly how to massage all of this to make sure that we show up authentic and transparent. And if we're smart enough and we have good enough pattern recognition, that's all something that can be totally gamed. And so it's a fair question. It's a fair question to ask ourselves, are we being really honest? And are we doing this for the right reasons? And to some extent, I think, you were saying it's kind of an ego trip to get all this feedback. I think we've been talking about feedback a lot on the podcast lately because this is our personal development growth experience right now, is that we've gone to a place where, like you mentioned, before, it was kind of like a little boutique podcast, and everybody who listened seemed to be, our friends on some level. And people would write in and talk about, Joel and Antonia, but now they write in and they get our names wrong. I've noticed that.
That woman or that man.
Yeah, that man. The man, he said that thing, or they'll call you Mark, right? Or they'll call me that woman or whatever. And so we're, like you mentioned, we become a little bit more depersonalized, and therefore, like you mentioned, we don't actually have credibility, and so we don't actually have status, and so now we're getting some legit feedback here, not friend feedback, but like stranger feedback, and some of it is, it's one of the reasons why in previous podcasts I've said, like, take all that feedback and see that there's something in there for you. And you've mentioned that you've always had a struggle with overvaluing feedback and trying to step into it and immediately respond to it. And I've mentioned, well, if that's the background you're coming from, if that's what your tendency has been, then don't listen to my advice, because my advice is bad when I say all feedback is valid. But I think there's a nuance here. I think there's like a tension point that I've been really ruminating on recently, which is that even if you're a person who denies all feedback, or if you you believe all feedback should be immediately absorbed and you overvalue all feedback, I think what it is it's not, I'm not necessarily suggesting to assume that the feedback you got, the specific words were always, like, the content of the feedback is always valid. I think it's more that the world is, at least some of the world is experiencing you in this way. So the thing that they might be saying, the specific words, might actually be misrepresentative of what's going on. So what's actually happening for this person? So, like, we got a comment or a rating on iTunes that was a 1-star rating. And I always read I can't help myself. I always have to read all the 1-star ratings. And the person said, I love their podcasts, but when I got to the Graves model podcast, where they were talking about these different levels, I couldn't stand them talking about how high up they are on the podcast, on the Graves model. Yuck, right? Or something to that effect, like, ugh. And what was so weird about it is I immediately went, I never say what level I think I am on the Graves model. I intentionally don't. I never do. And it's like a decision I made a long time ago. I just was never going to tell anybody unless somebody who's close to me directly asks me. I don't reveal my level of development, or what I believe is my level of development. Now, I'll talk about, mapping out when a person could have gone through different levels and I'll kind of talk about my journey a little bit. Like, I think I might have hit this level at this time period, and I may have hit this level at this time period, but I never actually reveal what level of development I think I'm at in the Graves model. And so when they said that we were talking about that, I immediately went, well, I never do that. So why would I have done it then? And then I thought, well, this person isn't actually complaining that I said I was so high up on the Graves model. The person is actually complaining that they think that I believe I'm above most people. That's actually the complaint. And so the universe is reflecting back to me that I'm coming across in some way, in a superior way.
So the emotions the person's feeling are coming across you now. You're able to read what someone else is feeling, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. It's this idea of what is the emotional interchange, because the content of it, like the actual specific thoughts are usually just justifications for whatever emotions we're feeling. And I mean, I say this as we, like as a species, like the thoughts are just concentrated emotions. So what is the emotion the person is feeling? And they were put off by a feeling of superiority. Well, do I think I'm a superior person? Sometimes I think I'm a superior person. Do I think I'm generally superior to others? Not really, no. But whatever it is inside me that feels that I'm superior, that's coming out. So the question I have is, should I not feel superior? Like, is that a valid thing to feel? There are moments when I do actually feel superior to other human beings. In the moments when I see somebody who is just creating all sorts of problems and challenges for everybody around them. And when I know every human being has a moment of self-reflection. There is a moment in almost every human being's life where they have like their brain pauses and goes, am I in the right path? Should I be doing this? And the decision they make in that quiet moment of self-reflection, of introspection, if they make choices that continue on a damaging path as opposed to reevaluating and going, maybe I need to reach out for some help, or maybe I need to do something a little different. When a person doesn't make the choice to reach out for help or do something a little different, I think that I have superior decision-making to them. I think when I choose to do something that will help another person, my personal standards say that it is the superior choice to choose to try to be better, as opposed to just stay in whatever stuck state that I'm in. Now, does that make me a more valuable person on the planet? It might. Who knows? Who knows what the result of that will be? I might have the best intent and think I'm super superior and do all the right things in my own mind, and I pass my own standards of qualifications in every way, and I do all this stuff, and then at the end of the day, I actually was I was actually a cause of harm to the world, because that can happen. People with the best intent. I think of the guy who created the Keurig coffee maker, and then when he discovered later that the plastics that he was using for the Keurig cups or the K-cups, that the plastic is not something that can be recycled, he realized the damage he had done to the planet, because the Keurig is one of the most, if not the most popular coffee pot on the planet. And so the K-cups that are being mass produced are now a massive recycling nightmare. And so if I'm not mistaken, I think I remember reading or hearing that he has now dedicated his life to trying to figure out how to recycle this plastic because he had the best intent, right? He was just trying to provide a product for people, and it was a really good product. In fact, it was such a good product that it took off like wildfire and people love it. But now it's caused a massive damaging impact. So in these moments when I think I'm superior and I'm doing all the things that past my own personal standards, that doesn't mean that I'm actually having a positive impact. I could be doing something very damaging. What if bringing personality types, our big goal or desire to bring personality typology concepts, or at least, that everybody's wired differently. What if it actually moves the needle and we are, figureheads of this movement and everybody adopts personality types, and then it ends up as a terrible idea? Like, it gets abused and people now weaponize it, and it's a horrific, like it's being used by different companies to, do demographic reports in order to manipulate the masses, which typology is already being used for. And it's just this horrible, horrible thing. And I was a part of that. I'm like, how superior are you in that moment, right? So it's this idea of like whatever that feeling of superiority that I have, which is not justified, that's leaking out because somebody felt it and got turned off and had to write a 1-star review. And the specific thing they said, which is that I'm talking about what level I'm at in the Graves model, is an inaccurate piece of data because I never reveal my level. Or at least what I believe my level is. And the thing that actually bothered them was that I felt like I was superior. And so that is being translated, and I'm striking people in that way. So how do I know that I'm actually on my path of growth if people are being struck by a sense of superiority from me? And does that mean that I'm not doing the work if somebody feels that way? Like, do I take that as I'm not actually on my personal development path, or I'm not doing the work because I'm striking the world in that way? And I think the answer is that these pieces of feedback we get from the world and the questions people have about whether or not they should actually listen to us, and the positive and the negative responses, I think that for me, doing all of this in a public light, I think for me, what I've really had to tap into was that the end game, I got to let it go. I have to let go of whatever the end game is in the outside world, the impact I want to have, whether or not people like me or enjoy listening to the podcast, or that I'm impacting people's lives in a big way or whatever. Like, I just have to let all of that go. The reason why I'm doing this is because I legitimately want to be the best version of myself. I truly do. And I want to show up in the best way possible because I think it contributes to my personal happiness and the happiness of the people around me. And all of my big game plans of changing the trajectory and moving the needle of society and putting humanity on a better path and hopefully, getting through all this tumultuous time period of history, which we clearly are at, and helping people see a better way. All of that may or may not happen. In fact, I mean, like, honestly, a meteorite could hit the planet and we're all dead. Like, it could just be a done deal. And right now, as I'm going through this process of becoming the best version of myself possible, like, that is the reward. I'm getting the reward for working on myself to be happier and to contribute to the happiness of the people around me. And even if I don't contribute to the happiness of the people around me, I want to, that seems to be the result. However, I want to be better. I just do. And so the feedback I get isn't intended to tell me how well I'm doing, like whether or not I'm actually growing. The feedback I'm getting lets me know, it gives me kind of a "you are here" dot. It lets me know how much moving of the needle I'm doing for myself, how much I'm showing up. So it's a feedback mechanism that gives me some metrics, but it's not the ultimate. It's not the why. It's a calibration technique. It's not a motivation, if that makes sense. And so for me and personal growth and development, when I think about pseudo growth, I think about flipping those two. I think about a person who uses the outer world feedback as their why and the inner fire as their calibration. And I think you can't use your inner fire as calibration because you're going to be off. You can use it to some extent. You can use it as one of the things that you triangulate. It can't be the only one because we are really, really, really good at throwing ourselves off and over or undervaluing ourselves or where we're at in our process. So for me, what's been great about doing personal work in a public format is that I get a lot of calibration back. I get a lot of responses back about how people are emotionally responding to me. And since growth and development is, to me, about happiness, then the emotion is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for happiness in myself, and I'm looking for happiness in other people. And happiness is not just like fun. It's not pleasure, right? It's not like a constant feeling of like I'm on a high all the time. It's a general situation of being able to find joy, even in a really low moment, knowing that it's going to pass, and when I get through the other side, I'm going to be able to bounce back and get into a state of joy or happiness. And so when I'm looking for personal development, the people who I follow in personal growth and personal development, the people whose podcasts I listen to, the videos I'm watching, the books I'm reading. I'm always looking for somebody who has that sense of joy and has the thing that I'm looking for, which is that ability to just want to be better no matter what the situation is. And that radical honesty, the ability to reflect back and go, I'm not where I might not be where I think I was, or I might be further along than I imagined, but I'm going to try to be modest in my personal assessment.
I think as you're talking, what comes up for me is that sounds so intense. I mean, this is the raw, like you talk about, are you doing the work? Like initially I'm like, my God, that just sounds so serious and hard. And then you want to find people that have joyfulness and presence and peacefulness and happiness. And it's almost like hard, gritty, get your fingers dirty work, get your hands dirty work along with this joyfulness seem mutually exclusive. They seem like they don't necessarily go together, seemingly. So it's like, whoa, it almost seems so intense. Like, are you doing like this, almost like this religious or cult-like movement? Like, are you up to snuff? Are you like, in my religious days it was like, how pure are you in God's eyes kind of question.
Were you going to follow that up? Because I have something to say.
No, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Okay. No, it is intense, right? It's called the work. Personal development work. Work is never a fun thing. It's like in marketing, they say never use the word work if you're trying to sell a product. And so if we're trying to sell personal development here, the work is like a terrible word to use. And although, I mean, I guess Byron Katie does it, right? Her entire program is called The Work, and she's done well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that you can't go that direction. But I understand what you're saying. When I think of personal development work, and then I think of the rewards at the end of it, which is happiness and joy, I always liken it to like literally a hard day's work, like physical manual labor. When you work hard all day physically, and at the end you have this sort of like this sense of, I don't know, it's like this equilibrium, the sense that you've really accomplished something and you feel good. There's like a return for just having physically worked hard, or a workout, right? Like you work out really hard and you do all this resistance training, and you don't skip leg day, right? And you do all of this, and at the end of it, this sort of this delicious tiredness, because you did a bunch of work, but then at the end of it, like there's this sense that that's what you were supposed to do. I think
so that gets onto what I'm saying here then. What's coming up for me is leg day isn't all day, every day. You set aside a time to stretch your legs and work on them, and then you benefit from that strength later in your life. So I guess the only distinction I want to make here, and the reason why I'm saying this is I think some people go through and they say, well, I've even had this happen in my life. Okay, I got to prove that I really want to grow and show up as the best version of myself. And I realize that that's not always possible. Like sometimes I'm exhausted. Sometimes I don't show up. Sometimes I like yell at my kids. Sometimes I yell at you. We get in a fight. I might be like, and snap at you and say something mean that I didn't mean to say. And so I guess the thing that's coming up for me is like almost space holding in some ways. So there's this element of pseudo growth, saying the right things. And sometimes you do that because you don't feel all the things. Like you say the right things sometimes in a context because it's not leg day every day, all day. You already did the leg day. You're sore, you're tired, you're getting stronger as you go. And you don't want to lash out. You don't want to respond in the bad pattern. So you fall back on a pseudo level of it, and you say, you don't have the space to do it authentically. So you say the right words right now. Okay, I'm going to hold, quote unquote, I'm going to hold space for you right now in this moment. Even if you don't feel like holding space, you do that because it's the mechanism, the mechanics of it, the process of it, even though you're not in the middle of lifting weights metaphorically that moment. Does this make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, can you flay that out a little bit?
So when I see people show up with what we might couch as pseudo growth, like let's say we're in our Intuitive Awakening group on Facebook, and someone shows up and uses language that sounds super flowery, like super like, they say all the right words, and I'm feeling the energy from that person that I don't think this person feels authentically what they're saying. This is platitude. This is them shining it on to look, quote unquote, developed in this moment. Because their alternative probably is they're feeling pretty crappy about something and they love to just lash out and be mean. but they're being above board and being, meta perspective on this comment, or they don't want to start a fight, so they're being very much space holdy, this kumbaya framework, right? If they're genuinely feeling terrible, is it better to just own it and lash out, or is it better to, the perspective is sometimes the pseudo development isn't pseudo development. It's not like the person didn't go and do leg day on Monday. It's Thursday and their legs are tired and they don't want to walk a mile over there. They'd rather drive. So they're going to drive because it's easier right now, even though they're still committed to doing, quote unquote, the work. Does this make sense?
Totally. Yeah, no, I the phrase that's coming up for me while you're talking is fake it till you make it.
Sort of, or just fall back on fake it till you make it, but that's like you haven't achieved it all. This is you're doing work, you're going, it's just you're tired.
Yeah.
It's not leg day. So you can't be expected to do leg day work all the time.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think that's the thing about development and growth, just like with working out. Like you're not working out all day every day, and you can't sustain personal development all day every day. Like you're not always actively working on some, yourself. I think even people who, and you and I have turned personal development into kind of a lifestyle. Like we kind of do it all the time, and we do it all the time because we want to stay accountable to ourselves and the message that we're stating, and because we want to show up not feeling like damn hypocrites when we get to the microphone. And so we've turned it into a lifestyle. And even then, there have been moments, and especially the last couple of weeks, I've been pretty exhausted from a bunch of work we've done and just context and situations of life. And you'll start talking about something that, you'll bring up a topic that is introspective, and you'll ask me what I think. And I'm just like, I don't know. I just really want to just watch something on Netflix. Like, I don't want to think about that. I can't even think about that. I have to not be thinking. And so you can't sustain that all the time. And I think there's something fair there, is that the challenge with this concept of pseudo development or pseudo growth is that I don't even know if a person from the outside could diagnose that. I think only you really know that about yourself. Only the individual can diagnose whether or not they're going through a pseudo development or pseudo growth. Because like you mentioned, sometimes we just take shortcuts, and we do that because that's what we need to do in the moment to be able to just get through the day, and then tomorrow we'll do better. I totally agree with that. So the idea of pseudo development and pseudo growth, and I just want to do a shout out to all my Intuitive Awakening people on our Facebook group. We mention them a lot in the podcast because it's the community that we invite people to if they're podcast listeners. And not everybody in that group actually is a podcast listener. In fact, there's a lot of people in Intuitive Awakening that only heard about Personality Hacker after they joined the group, because it's a Facebook group, and so people will join. And so I just want to put a shout out to the Intuitive Awakening people that, like, we're not talking about, like, if you think we're talking about you, like somehow we've been scouring the forum and like you're the person we're talking to about having shown up talking flowery, but we know what's going on. Like, we're not talking about
There's
you.
no one person or even group of people in our mind as we talk about this.
No. So
it just came up as a topic.
Yeah. So please don't think we're talking about you. And I think what it is actually the model in our head is not people in Intuitive Awakening. The model in our head is people in other personal growth contexts that we're very familiar with, and people who have shown up. Like we did a podcast that you guys never heard because we got in touch with somebody who's considered a real guru in the personal development community, published a couple books, has workshops going on all the time, like somebody who's like legit plugged into the development community. And we started talking to this person, and both of us by the end of the podcast went, I don't think we can publish this because I don't think this person's the real deal. Now, how could we know that? How could we possibly ever know that? Maybe we talked to this person on an off day. Maybe they just didn't vibe with us. Maybe they didn't just, they didn't gel with us. We asked the wrong questions and they came up with, answers that we didn't really get. So it wasn't for us to judge it, but there's just something that felt like off about the whole thing. It was like, this person knows all the right things to say, but when we ask them the more penetrating questions, like, tell us what your growth, challenges have been and your struggles, like they wouldn't go there. They wouldn't go to challenges or struggles. They kind of glossed over it and just sort of talked about all the positive, flowery things about growth. And it just didn't strike us. We were like, I don't think this is what we want on our podcast. And that's actually happened a couple times. We've talked to people that we've interviewed, and interviews are nice because we don't have to do all the talking, right? The interviews are great because somebody else gets to do the talking. And it's great because we'll have a podcast in the can and we'll be like, cool, we can just publish that. But there have been a couple of occasions we've talked to the person and gone, I just don't think this will serve the audience because it's not raw enough. It's not real. I mean, I'm sure it was real for them, and I don't want to project onto them that they're not actually growing or developing, but it just didn't have that ring of true authenticity. Not to say they weren't authentic, but it just didn't have that rawness about it. And at the same time, you can't really diagnose that for another person. You can only have it like sort of strike you as an individual. So I just wanted to let the Intuitive Awakening group know that we're not talking about you, the user, in there. There's just like sort of the sentiment about how do you travel through a personal development world and avoid becoming the person who knows all the right things to say. And that's your strategy. I think the difference between somebody who's doing pseudo growth, and again, only you can diagnose this about yourself. Only you know whether or not you're taking a shortcut because that's all you can manage in the moment. And that's it. That's all the resource you have right here, right now. And so you've just got to kind of shine it on and get through it. Versus somebody who isn't doing work, but is really good at having people think you're doing work. Like only you know that. But I think the thing that I use personally is whether or not I'm having a moment or whether or not I have a go-to strategy. And the go-to strategy of knowing all the right things to say, I've been there before. I've been in a place where I wasn't doing the things I was supposed to be doing. And I wasn't growing the way that I knew I needed to be growing. Like my inner wisdom was trying to tell me that, but I was using all the right words. And so I was able to fool other people. And this, of course, is as an ENTP, this is where my extroverted feeling or harmony 10-year-old is the way it kind of trips me up, is that, oh, I'm getting the feedback that I'm on the right path. Well, then I must be on the right path. and there's been a couple of times when that's just not been true. I've not been on the right path and I needed to do some serious course correction. So sometimes the outer world feedback can't really give you good calibration because you're good enough at shining it on. But I use it now because I am in a position where lots of different people are hearing us. And so lots of different people can give me impressions. It's not just a small select group of people that I'm carefully curating to ensure that those are the people who will be fooled by me, which is kind of how I was before. I was making sure that only certain people were giving me feedback on whether or not I was doing the right thing. And that's because, and regardless of whether or not I was conscious of it, my inner wisdom was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear at the moment. That said, even during that time period, I was still a person who was interested in growth. So in some ways, like I just wasn't in the position at that. Wasn't resourced enough at the time to be able to truly do it. So even in the moment that I was pretending to be growing, I think I was still not in a terrible place because I was still interested. I still wanted to be a person of growth. Even if I couldn't manage it in the moment myself, I still wanted to sort of have the trappings of it because that was truly my authentic desire. I just wasn't ready to do the thing I needed to do to make it not just an authentic desire, but like an authentic path. So even quote unquote pseudo development or pseudo growth can have like that can be a positive thing too. It's just staying there and not actually moving the needle when the opportunities arise. And again, I think only the individual can diagnose all this for themselves. I think one of the biggest things about growth is that you have to get super good at figuring out your own map, like the map of your personal development and growth. You have to get really good at creating that map for yourself. You have to get really good at knowing where you are at on your timeline and where you're at with all your resources and where, like all of this stuff, nobody else can diagnose that for you. You're the only person that can really, really know that about yourself.
So taking the gym metaphor, I think it's a really interesting metaphor. You know, there's a physical ability to grow. As a person, you can sign up for a gym membership. You can go and do leg day and arm day, chest day, whatever you're going to work on in your body that week. You can split it up on different days or do it all together. And there's all sorts of different pathways. So first of all, I think we can take from this, not all growth looks the same. Individuals, depending on your height, your weight, let's just again use the metaphor of the gym. You have different ways of approaching health. You might want to build muscle. You might want to shed weight. You might want to add weight. You might want to bulk up. You might want to thin down. You might want to tone up. I mean, there's all sorts of different goals people have. So first of all, you have to identify what is your personal growth goals in some ways, just like you do with the physical gym. And the other part is you're not always, like we talked about, not always working on this all the time. You're going and maybe doing concentrated, maybe you go to a workshop. You're doing a concentrated workshop of personal growth. Maybe you're ordering a course online, or you're signing up for a program and you're doing concentrated work around one specific skill or one area of personal growth, or you buy a book or you talk to somebody. So there's these workouts, quote unquote, we have. And just like with the gym, it's over time you start to see results. It's not just one workout. It's not just going and buying a Anthony Robbins book and then all of a sudden now your life's fixed. Like that might be the start of your workout routine. And now you start to work out personal growth wise. Maybe you spend some time reading every week personal growth books, and this becomes a habit and a discipline. And now your thermostat of how you show up to the world starts to raise overall. You're still going to have dips. You're still going to show up and have to articulate things in a way that may not be the best way, for you or for the situation, and course correct and figure it out. But you're overall starting to get better at growing. And just like going to the gym probably encourages most people, if they start to get really serious about it, to take other aspects of their health into account. So often I've seen people start going to the gym and working out, and now all of a sudden they're interested in eating better. So now this one workout has bled over to another area of their life, and they're eating in a more healthy fashion. And then maybe eating healthy now leads to, dressing better. So you're now working out, you're eating better, you're dressing better, and now other areas of your life are impacted. We're all starting somewhere, right? So personal growth isn't just holistic out of the gate. You're probably focused on one area of it. You probably accessed it through some access point like business or relationships. Maybe there was a catalyst somewhere that got you into this. And now as you start to work on that, it's starting to bleed out into other areas of your life. But as it's bleeding out into other areas of your life, for some reason with personal growth, again, this ego trip that we talked about a while back, it's like this expectation to show up in a way in all these areas that you haven't necessarily worked on. I mean, I'll say this from personal example right here on the podcast. I struggle with eating healthy and taking care of my physical body. As disciplined as I am around trying to shift perspectives for other people, holding emotional space, finding to understand what somebody's motivation must be on the other side, I still have not dialed in my physical health and my eating. I still eat shit for myself sometimes. Like I eat stuff that's not healthy. I still don't have a regimented, consistent workout regime. I try to do as much walking and as much workout as I can, but I haven't figured this piece out. And to show up onto the podcast or onto one of our online forums and speak with authority as a pseudo-development, like I've arrived in my physicality and how I eat and how I exercise, would be inconsistent. Now, it doesn't mean I don't want to come and give a positive message about health. I shot a video several years ago about making morning smoothies. It's something that we try to do a lot. It gives us energy, and it's a leverage point for us to be more healthy. Am I totally unqualified to talk about that online in a video? I don't think so. I think it's an idea. I didn't say I was an expert at it. I got a lot of feedback about some of the things I could tweak and make better after I shot that video. I learned a lot from doing it. And I'm still positively encouraging you to eat healthy, to be healthy, to work out, to take care of your body, even though I struggle with it myself. The point is that we have access points of where we started our growth journey, and we probably are good at the thing we've been working on for a while, but that doesn't necessarily translate into all areas of our life. It doesn't make us experts across the board.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, this idea of who's qualified to talk about development and growth. And I think if you are at all interested in development and growth, I think you're qualified to talk about it. And if you're, I think we follow, we talked about this before in previous podcasts, that we tend to follow people who are just like a little ahead of us. We don't follow people who are way ahead of us because we can't see them. And we don't follow people behind us. We follow people who are just a little ahead. And if you're interested in development and growth and your goal is to help people, then talk about it and feel free to talk about it in a public format. And the people who are trying to get to where you're at will follow you. And maybe not that far into your growth process. Maybe you're just starting your journey. And so you might not get that big of an audience. You might not have a huge audience following you because you aren't ahead of a huge group of people. But if you can confidently talk about being interested in growth and development, and you have good intent, and you're sharing your journey, I think that I think that you're qualified to talk about it, and the audience will find you. It's almost like a message in a bottle, Like sometimes we create content just to be able to, for our own sake, right? We do it for us. Actually, I think most people who create content are doing it for themselves. In some cases, maybe just to keep themselves honest. It's almost like an accountability strategy to, like we've talked about it. We do this podcast in part because it keeps us honest. We have to stay in integrity with the podcast. And that means if we really want to be people of growth and development, or if we really want to be in integrity and move the needle, then this is part of how we do that, because we show up every week and we have to talk about our process and the things that we've learned and, tools that we've picked up. And we can't really do that and be hypocrites and not actually be doing growth and development, or at least like we can't do that. You and me, Joel, like that just, we immediately recognize when we're doing that. So if a person is, if a person is creating content, they're probably doing it for themselves to keep themselves in integrity. And that's, in my opinion, that's a perfectly reasonable reason to create content around it. So the question at the beginning of the podcast, which is, how do you know that we're people of growth? How do you know that we're people you should even be listening to? And how do you know if you're a person of growth? How do you know if you're actually on a growth path and not doing like pseudo growth or whatever? I think the answer is, well, only you can know that about yourself. And if you're listening to people who have good things to tell you, regardless of whether or not, like we could be fakes, we could be shysters, like we just said we're not, but I mean, we're the only people who really know that about ourselves.
Of course we'd say that if we were.
Right. But we're the only people who really know whether or not we are. And if you find good things here that help you on your path, then continue to listen. And if it stops, if you're getting an emotional read that's not right for you, like the person who said that, like, they didn't say this, but the emotion behind what they said was effectively, they sound superior to me, and that's not working for me. Then if you feel something to that effect, then go find somebody who is more in your vibration, somebody who's more like helping you in your growth path. But I think with the subject of pseudo-development, I think it's one of those things that's kind of, ultimately at the end of the day, it's sort of a non-issue. It's like, well, do the thing that moves the needle for you and follow the people that help move the needle for you. That guru that we didn't publish the podcast, that person has helped hundreds of thousands of people with their books. And again, they have workshops all over the world dedicated to their books. So that person is helping move the needle for a lot of people. They didn't strike us. We didn't feel like what they had to say, at least in that hour of talking to them, was something that would really serve our audience. We were curating the content to ensure that it would be something for our audience. And we feel like what we want to present is some very raw stuff. We want to present the struggles and the challenges and overcoming those. But that's just our choice. For a lot of other people, the way that they're packaging their message is exactly what they need to hear. So we could say, well, that person's into pseudo growth, but we don't know that. They might be massively dialed in.
They might be dialed into a different access point. Some people may not be ready to hear the raw, honest, gritty stuff, maybe.
Yeah.
And so they're getting people where they're at, and they're able to grow from that level. Absolutely.
So if you're into growth and development, then just that's all you need to know, I think. And being really honest when you go inward, when you have those quiet moments, when you're questioning yourself. We did a podcast on imposter syndrome. And it's really easy to allow imposter syndrome and the voices inside of you around imposter syndrome to start drowning out the really quiet, almost fragile voice of your inner wisdom that's trying to tell you exactly where you're at. There is a voice inside of you that is trying to be as accurate as possible. It's trying to let you know exactly where you're at in your growth and your process. And it's hard to hear it because there's so much other programming that comes rushing in, all the insecurity, all the parts of the ego that it wants to protect away from itself. All that stuff comes in. It's like, oh, I'm an imposter. Or, no, I'm doing really well, right? Like whatever's trying to buff up the ego and make it feel good. But there's like a really quiet, fragile voice inside all of that has no agenda other than just delivering to you pure, unadulterated truth. And that's the voice you're listening for. You're trying to remove all the insecure voices, all the things that are giving you an emotional hit. I think when you get to that voice, that quiet, fragile voice of pure, unadulterated truth, I don't think there's much of an emotion piece there. Maybe I'm just saying that because I'm in the NCP and I'm using introverted thinking, and that for me, there's no emotion that comes along with that message. But I do think inside of us, when we hear true modesty about ourselves, when we hear our inner voice tell us exactly where we're at, I don't think that there's a lot of fanfare that comes with it. I don't think there's a lot of sort of visceral emotion that comes with it. It's just kind of like a sense of peace. You're like, oh, okay. All right. Yeah. All right. That's where I'm at on the map. And that's really the voice you're looking for. And if that voice is saying, hey, you've got some strategies to avoid the work you're really supposed to be doing right now, and I don't know if you're ready for that work, I just want you to know that's coming for you. Or if you are ready for it, maybe that's the thing you should start doing right now. Then that's really your assessment. The outer world will help calibrate that. It will help give you information to help calibrate that. But ultimately, it's that inner voice that really tells you exactly where you're living. And I think a big piece of getting good at development work, like I said, that map is drawn by that little voice. That map is drawn by the inner wisdom voice that lets you know what it is you want, where you actually are at, and where you're headed. And so getting really good at hearing that voice in amongst all the cacophony of insecurity and the cacophony of ego boosting. I think that's the piece that will let you know whether or not you're staying in integrity. Even if you're faking it a little bit right now, faking it until you make it, doing the things you need to do in order to get to the next day, that little voice will let you know that that's okay too, if it's just for the moment. But that little voice won't let you do it for too long. It won't let it turn into a strategy, which is why I think that voice is so important.
I think for me, as you talk about that little voice, I was trying to think through it, and I thought at the end of the day, or the end of my life, I guess I'll say, and on a micro level at the end of every day, I want my existence and my life to have mattered. I want it to have meant something. I want to have a reason for why I'm here. And I think that I think that is a universal desire. I think we all want our lives to matter. We want to have a reason for why we're here on the planet. And I realize, so I think in that term, I want my life to have mattered. I honestly do. And I realize as I walk through my day, like I'm the hero of my own story. I'm the entry point into what I perceive in the world. And as I walk through the day, I realize everybody else is feeling the same way I'm feeling. Everybody else is the hero of their story. Their life is just as important to them, and they think that their life should matter just as much as I think my life should matter. Like we're walking on this earth together, but it's not like they think that my life should matter more than theirs. We all have this sense that my life matters the most. Not that nobody else does, but we definitely, in a hierarchy sense, if we really sit there with it, otherwise we wouldn't behave the way we do. We really think that our death would be the worst thing that ever happened to the universe. And that still small voice you're talking about, for me, it's the realization that I really don't matter that much that comes up. So it's less of a cold truth for me. It's more of a sense that if I died right now, yeah, there'd be a large, I would hope, a large segment of people that would be sad for a short period of time. And within 300 years, probably no one would remember me at all, let alone maybe 100 years from now. So my existence being snuffed out wouldn't really have that big of an impact. And man, is that an ego hit to sit with that thought, to say, I want my life to have mattered, but it probably really at the end of the day doesn't. It really, I hope I don't cause anybody to be like despondent here or depressed. But the point is that, like, what am I preserving when I show up to the world and I want this thing that I live in to matter so much? And I think the hints that we realize that we're really on a grand scale pretty insignificant as individuals and even as a species of humans to the degree that we can think about it. It really is fairly meaningless. And eventually the sun's going to explode and humanity will be wiped out unless we figure out some colonization, other planets or something like that. So at the end of the day, all of this is going to be gone, right? It's going to be churned through, and humans will not exist someday, a million years from now, probably sooner, but a million years from now at least, when the sun explodes, or however. One person that knows when the sun's going to explode, or the estimate, will write in and let me know how long we have till the sun explodes. It's going to be a while. I'll be dead before it happens. Long story short, we think that we matter, but we have these little things that come up, and these little questions that go, oh, maybe I don't matter as much as I think I do. And then we get panicked and we rush to try to fill in the gaps and prove. I don't think it's proving to other people. I think it's proving to ourselves that we matter. That's why we show up in whatever way that we show up, our weird idiosyncrasies or our striving for ego or whatever. I mean, this is how I think I show up. I show up and I want to prove to myself that this all means something and it's valid and it's real and it matters, right? And I think that's really at least for me, that's the voice I'm avoiding of why I have any of these pseudo growth things come up for me in my life. When they do, is I'm attempting to avoid that reality. Is if I was gone, it probably wouldn't matter that much to the world. Not that it wouldn't matter at all, but it probably wouldn't on the grand scheme of things matter that much. And yet reconciling that with, but I am here and I do have impact and there are people connected to me. And at the same time, I do matter to the world in some ways. So it's this tension point between these two almost extremes, and getting that tension point right. I think this is where, for me, when I'm working with, is this real growth or is this pseudo growth? If I boil it all down, it really comes down to that concept of the ego for me, and how much am I panicked that I might not matter in my life or the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think for me, and I'm so glad you opened up the veil of sharing that, because that got me thinking about what's going on for me. And the thing I mentioned earlier about that am I superior or am I not? I think when I ask myself if I'm actually truly growing or doing pseudo growth, this idea of, are my choices the superior choices? Is the choice to grow? Because I talk about my brother sometimes, because my brother was, and especially in light of not having a relationship with my parents, my brother was kind of like a third parent to me. He's like 9 years older than me, and he taught me a lot of stuff. Just, basic things of how to get through the world. So he's been a very important influence in my life. And we went through a time period where we didn't talk at all. Like I said something to hurt him during one of my very difficult 20s, and we didn't talk for years. And then he reached out to me, and then we started talking again. And now we have kind of like a little relationship. Nothing like it was before. He was like pretty much the voice in my head before. And when I look at my brother, he's wildly successful at this point. Like, he's gone beyond just success into like filthy rich. He's got, book writing, novel creds, and he's got TV show creds, and he's like really done very well for himself. And when we talk about development and growth, he just gives me this look like, okay, I guess that's whatever you're doing for you. It's like not a thing for him at all. And I get these, my question inside is, am I making the superior choice to actually try to make the world a better place, or to try to make myself a better person in order to influence the world to be a better place? And my fear, like that inner voice goes, it really might not matter at all. Like you were saying, you don't matter. For me, it's like the things I'm doing, the work I'm doing in order to become a better person. Like that doesn't matter. I could be hedonistic and just do nothing. I could be creating content about fluffy stuff and maybe even have a more successful business and just talk about Myers-Briggs. What if we just talked about Myers-Briggs nonstop all the time, and we never applied it to, we never talked about growth or anything, and we just tried to create this humongous business around personality types? And maybe that would actually be more successful than what we're doing, because growth is a niche, right? Type is a niche, but growth is even smaller niche within type. So what if I just focused 100% on getting as big of a business as possible, trying to have as much comfort in my life and pleasure in my life as possible, and then die? And is what I'm doing necessarily superior? Is it more noble? And I think I think my inner voice goes, no, it's not more noble. It's not more superior. it makes you happier, and ostensibly it makes the people around you happier. But then look at all the fallout you get from all this work. Like your parents don't talk to you and there's a bunch of people who write in and tell you you're full of shit. And I'm like, well, maybe it doesn't mean anything. And I realized that at the end of the day for me, even though I don't actually think I'm going to be able to accomplish the goals that I want to accomplish, because my goals are pretty ridiculously big. They're stupidly ambitious and probably not capable of being accomplished in a single lifetime. So I've let go of me being able to accomplish the goals that I want to accomplish because unfortunately I just think idealistically big, and I know that. But at the end of the day, my little fragile inner voice is the voice that says, "But you have to try." And I've realized that that's become my life motto.
Why? Why do you have to try?
Probably because I get an emotional hit from it. Like it's just
it's just inherently rewarding.
It's just inherently rewarding. You have to try, or I have to try. I think about this in terms of your sons, your two sons from previous marriage. Their mother is
challenging.
Challenging is a nice word to say.
Challenging to us. Challenging
to us and to them. Like your older son has major challenges based on that relationship, and it's become one of the most emotionally and psychologically expensive things in my life is supporting your son, especially your older son Gunnar, because he's another ENTP and he and I have connected like crazy, and we're two peas in a pod, and I just watch him have so much struggle, and I want to be there for that kid, but I don't know if I don't know what the end's going to be. Like, I don't know how he's going to grow up. I don't know if he's going to grow up to be a good person or a person who continues to have major challenges. I don't know whether or not any of the work I pour into him is going to pay off at all. I have no idea, because some weekends that he comes and visits us, he's great, and I can tell that I have a good influence on him, and other weekends he comes up and I'm just like, I don't even know what why am I bothering? And then I think when I have those moments of why am I bothering, that little voice comes up and goes, yeah, but you have to try. Like, what kind of person would you be if you didn't try? Well, how would you be able to face him as an adult if you said, no, I told your dad I don't even want to try anymore, and let's just move to the West Coast and let's be nowhere near them, and let's just have that not be a part of us at all. Like, I don't even want to think about them again. And there are some people who do that. There are some people who leave children to bad situations and they don't really think about it again because they're like, well, I just couldn't do it. Like, I just wasn't in a position to. And they forgive themselves, and the kids grow up, and the kids figure out a way to forgive their parents, or they don't, for leaving them. And this is not even my kid, right? Like, this is a step kid we're talking about. This is not even my own flesh and blood. And so every time I think about this idea of just not, we were talking to a person who said that they got married to the stepmother of their child, and the woman they married doesn't want anything to do with the daughter. Like, the daughter was in her preteens or something, and she wanted nothing to do with her. And so the dad connects with the daughter, but always the stepmom is nowhere to be seen. And I was like, that's a choice you can make. Why couldn't you make that choice? That's a perfectly valid choice to make. This isn't my kid, so I don't want to interrupt the process of any of this. And so I've thought about that. I'm like, this is really expensive. This is very emotionally and psychologically expensive. So why am I doing this? I could just bow out and just be like, you know what, this is not my deal. I'm just gonna bow out of this. And then I get that voice in me that goes, yeah, but you have to try. Even if it all explodes in your face at the end of it, you have to try. And so that's my guiding star. And so the meaning becomes the trying. And so that tells me whether or not I'm on the right path. Because if I'm doing it just for the reward, if I'm doing it just because I think it's all going to pan out well for me, if I have an inkling that it's not going to pan out well for me, then I stop trying. But if I do it because I have to try, then it doesn't matter what the end result's going to be. And so, yeah, that's my guiding star of knowing I'm on the right path for growth, is that I have to try.
I think this, and we can start wrapping up here, this comes back to something you said earlier about how you're the only person, Antonia is the only person that can tell where Antonia is in the personal growth journey. Joel is the only person that can really truly know where Joel is in the personal growth journey, you listening, you're the only person that can tell truly where you are in the personal growth journey. Just like if you went to the gym, you might have a personal trainer, but if you skipped leg day, again, using that metaphor, you're the only one that really knows you skipped it or took the easy way out. Maybe you didn't do that last set of reps. You just cut a shortcut. You know that. No one else necessarily knows. As far as they know, they saw you driving to go to leg day. Maybe you just swung around the corner and grabbed a coffee, didn't even go into the gym. So you can't necessarily know if you're on the right track from the external feedback. You're the one that knows. And just like you can't really use the outside world to calibrate you, or you can use it to calibrate you, but you can't really use it to know like where you are necessarily. You have to kind of look inside to know, am I truly doing this, or is this something I'm shining on? You also, in the midst of that, basically you can't do it for the outside world either. Like it's done from internal reasons. Like you're talking about in this situation, Antonia, the reward may never come. You may never see a return on this investment you're putting in.
Yeah, your boys might end up hating me.
Yeah.
That's a possibility.
It could go badly, or, heaven forbid, one of them, like they are not in our lives anymore or something. It just is for whatever reason. And so like all the work has just been for nothing, right? In that situation. Or has it been for nothing? It's still you disciplining yourself to do something, and it's because you feel good about doing it, or you feel like it's the right thing to do. Even if you don't feel good, quote unquote, a positive emotion, you still feel like you're on the right process. Again, we talked about a couple podcasts ago, process versus result. And if you're process focused, if you're focusing in on refining your internal and external processes, and that's where your work is done, you probably will get good results in your life. But if you're doing it only for the results, that may not be the best metric, because there's things we do that we can't predict the results for. And if you're only doing things where you can predict the outcome of result, that's problematic because you can't control that. All you can control is what happens for you. And I guess I've come back to turn all this stuff around on myself a lot. It ends up being self-referential, which again, now exacerbates the thing we started talking about at the very beginning, this ego trip idea. Whereas in personal growth, I realize I am the starting and ending point to all of it for myself, which now puts me in a very vulnerable place where if I'm the place that's being measured and I'm the generator of the energy there. And the measurer. Well, I could create any story or narrative I wanted, and I could shine it on and use all the flowery language I wanted, and I would be the only one that knows I'm doing it. I mean, maybe the results in my life would bear out differently, but in other words, it's almost like how do I say it? Like, I don't know the exact words, but almost like the more you're on the right track, quote unquote, the more vulnerable you are to getting onto the wrong track. Like there's risk and reward in both. And the more you're starting to calibrate yourself, the potential for you to be uncalibrated is even greater, because you're starting to realize I'm the measurer of all of this. I'm the generator of all of this. So it's really tricky. It can be really tricky in personal growth. All of these things can start to weave together now. And it can actually be, the more you grow, the harder it gets to stay on a growth path, because you realize it's all generated from you.
Yeah, well, and what that made me think of is this idea, again, going back to the gym metaphor of working out. If you're doing growth, you usually do actually have some positive return on it. That's one of the reward systems, is that you're usually a happier, more chill person, and you'll get feedback that people will observe and notice it. And like you were saying, sometimes when you're on the right path and you get all this feedback that you're on the right path, sometimes you can get hyper-focused on that feedback and then get onto the wrong path, that makes me think of people who do bodybuilding. They start out doing it for health, but then eventually they're doing things like taking steroids. And it's because they got so much positive feedback that they looked good, that suddenly that became the goal, no longer the health piece. And we can do that in personal development. We can start, quote unquote, taking steroids. We can do all the things that make us look like we're getting bigger and healthier. And really, we've gotten off on the wrong path. I think that's a really, really good concept, or like a good thought you just came up with. I think we could probably wrap this up. I have no idea how long we've been talking.
I don't know either. It's been a very kind of in the moment, present. I've lost track of time.
I have too. This might be like a super long 1.5 hour podcast. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just 45 minutes. I've totally lost track of time. But I thought this was interesting, especially for you and me right now. Because in the spirit of radical honesty, we kind of didn't want to do a podcast at all. We were just trying to stay in integrity and in alignment with our promised podcast every week. And we were like, all right, let's just sit down, kick it on. Let's talk about this concept of pseudo growth because it was mentioned in one of our communities, and we thought that was kind of an interesting concept. And then I think that some really good stuff was mined here, at least for me, like self-reflective stuff. I've taken notes, and I'm gonna go think about afterward for sure.
And Antonia and I are 2 nodes in this 3-part triad of this podcast. There's Antonia, there's myself, and there's you listening. And we want your voice to be represented as well. You don't have a microphone here in our studio with us, but you have an asynchronous ability to come and share your story, to share your perspective, to share your thoughts, to share your questions or comments over at personalityhacker.com. As we continue to put these podcasts out, the community continues to grow. People are attracted to it, just like you, and other people will share their voices as well, but we need your voice represented there. So come over to personalityhacker.com. Again, under this podcast, leave your feedback, leave your story. I love stories about your journey because it's a humanizing experience rather than just a comment or a question. Stories are powerful. It's really how we organize our lives through narrative, right? So if you can share your story, it gives us all the ability to interact with you in a way, not just me and Antonia, but other people of the community can share in your story, can understand it, can ask you questions, and we can get some dialogue started. You can also join our communities online. We've got a presence on a lot of different social media platforms, at Facebook, on Twitter. We're growing on Instagram now. We're starting to hook up some of these, and also on YouTube. We invite you to come over to the YouTube channel, and multiple YouTube channels on different topics that we're starting to grow out. We've got one on Enneagram. We have one on the main Personality Hacker, site. And we also have the podcast that's being put on YouTube. So come over to the different Personality Hacker channels, get involved, immerse yourself in this conversation. Your voice is important in this conversation, and we need it represented.
Yeah. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you want to support Personality Hacker, support our cause and our mission and the things that we're trying to do here, we recommend you go check out some of our premium content at the website at personalityhacker.com. Under the program tabs, it'll let you know all of our premium content offerings. And if something is interesting to you, we recommend you go check it out.
My name is Joel Markowitz.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we will talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.